Today's lesson is finding angles using sine, cosine, and tangent. So first, let's just review sine, cosine, and tangent quickly. Remember our little mnemonic device is SO-CA-TOA. S stands for sine, O stands for opposite, H stands for hypotenuse. C stands for cosine, adjacent hypotenuse, and T stands for tangent, opposite adjacent. So the sine of any angle is equal to the opposite side over the hypotenuse. That's how we get the SO, S-O-H. Cosine is equal to the adjacent side of the triangle over the hypotenuse. And that's how we get CA, C-A-H. And then tangent is opposite over adjacent. And that's how we get TOA, T-O-A, tan, opposite, adjacent. So in this triangle over here, if we just practice this for a second, if I ask for the sine of A, it means I'm sitting at angle A, and I want to know what fraction would that equal to. So for sine, remember, it's opposite over hypotenuse. So from A, the opposite side of the triangle is 3, and the hypotenuse is 4. So the sine of A would be 3/4. If I ask for the cosine of B, that means B is my angle. So cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So the adjacent side to B would be 3, and the hypotenuse would be 4. For tangent of A, it means I'm on angle A again, so this one, and I'm supposed to go opposite side over adjacent. Opposite side is 3, adjacent side is 5, so it's 3/5. Remember, in a right triangle, the side opposite the 90 degrees, that's always the hypotenuse. These two sides could be opposite or adjacent, depending on which angle you're looking at. If you're on this angle, then this is the opposite side, this is the adjacent. If you're on this angle, then this side becomes the opposite, and this becomes the adjacent. Remember, adjacent means next to. So the adjacent side or the next to side for angle A would be this one. Well, I can use that information to find angles in a triangle. We already know one angle, C, is 90 degrees, especially because it's even marked that way. So in this one, I want to find the measure of angle A. Okay? Now, we need to look at the triangle and look at the information they've given us. From A, they have given us the opposite side as 3 and the hypotenuse as 5. So they've given us information for the opposite and the hypotenuse. So looking at our choices, I just need to choose the one that's using the opposite and the hypotenuse, which would be sine, because sine is opposite over hypotenuse. So what I would write down is sine of A equals opposite over hypotenuse. Okay? Now, to get the angle, I actually have to get rid of the sine. And the way we get rid of the sine is to multiply it by the inverse sine, or sine to the -1 power. That cancels the sine. On this side, I need to take sine to the -1 of 3/5. And this is actually called the inverse sine. There's a button on your calculator for this, and I'm going to show it on 2 different calculators. If you have one of these scientific calculators, you'll notice there's a, oops, a little higher. You'll notice that there is a sine, cosine, and tangent button. But if you look above those, you'll see there's a sine -1, cosine -1, and tangent -1. So those are the buttons we use when we want to find the angle. So what I would do is type in inverse sine. So to get that sine -1, I have to hit second sine. Then you see it comes up on the calculator. And then type in 3/5, 3 divided by 5. And then hit enter. And the answer I get, the 36.86, that is the angle. And for our purposes, we're going to round to the nearest angle, nearest degree. So we would say that A was 37, just for simplicity reasons. So whenever I want to find the angle, when I know the fraction, I just do the inverse of whatever trig function I'm using. and you find that on your calculator. On the big calculator, if you have one of these, again, there's a sine, cosine, and tangent button right there. And above them are inverse sine, inverse cosine, inverse tangent. The inverse ones are the ones I want to use when I want to find the angle. So if I want to use inverse sine, I would hit second again, so the yellow key, and then sine. You'll see sine to the -1 comes up, and then I type in 3 divided by 5. Hit enter, and notice I get exactly the same answer I got on the other calculator. It won't matter what calculator you use, you'll get the same answer. You could even use a calculator that's on your Chromebook. Let's try this example. It says find the measure of angle B. So here's B. Again, you need to look at the triangle to see what information they've given us. They've given us the hypotenuse, and 3 is the adjacent side this time. So I have adjacent and hypotenuse. So I go up back to here and look for adjacent hypotenuse. That's cosine. So when I go to the problem, I'm going to type cosine B equals adjacent 3 over hypotenuse 5. Now to find the angle, I'm going to do inverse cosine 3/5. So let's do it on this calculator. So this time I need inverse cosine, which is above the cosine key right here. So I'm going to hit second cosine, and then cosine -1 comes up, and then I'm going to type in the 3 divided by 5. Hit enter, I get 53.13. So B equals 53.13, and for our purposes and on Moodle, I just want you to round it to the nearest degree. So we'd say it's 53 degrees. And usually we type in or show the degree symbol for an angle, but on Moodle you could just type in 53. But technically it does have that little 0, makes it an angle. So if you turn your note sheet over to the second side, let's try this one. I want to find the measure of angle A. Here's A. And according to the picture, they've given me the opposite side and the adjacent side. So they didn't give me the hypotenuse. Well, if you look at your trig identities on the previous side, you'll know that the opposite and adjacent sides belong to the tangent. So this time I'm going to use tangent. So I'm going to say tangent of A equals the opposite side over the adjacent side. Now to get the angle, you do tan -1 of 3/4. So on my calculator, I'm going to hit second tan, and tan -1 comes out, and then I'm going to do 3 divided by 4. And it's 36.86, so we're going to round that to 37 degrees. And 3/4 is the same as 0.75, and you can type that into your calculator too, instead of the 3 divided by 4, and you'll get the same answer. Let's look at another example. Here I want to find A and B. So let's find A first. Finding A, notice they've given us the opposite and the hypotenuse. That's sine. So sine A is opposite over hypotenuse. And then to find the angle, remember you do inverse sine of 20 over 40. And 20 over 40 is the same as 0.5, so you can type in either one. So since I'm using sine, I'm going to do second sine, and then I'll just type in 0.5 because it's shorter. And I get 30 degrees. So A is 30. Now to find B, up here, this time I have the adjacent and the hypotenuse. Adjacent and hypotenuse is cosine. So I'm going to say cosine B equals adjacent over hypotenuse. So to find the angle, I'm actually going to do cosine -1 of 20 over 40. And remember, 20 over 40 is the same as 1/2. So I'm going to do second cosine this time, 0.5, and I get 60 degrees. Now, there's one more page to the notes, and this is just to make sure you got it. Here's our triangle. I have 7, 24, and 25, and 3 questions. Find A using the sine, find A using cosine, find A using tangent. So I should get the same answer for all of these since I'm looking for the same angle each time. But let's see if we can use each of these trig identities. So using the sine is opposite over hypotenuse, so 24 over 25. Using cosine of A, it would be adjacent over hypotenuse, so 7 over 25. And if I wanted to use tangent, it would be opposite over adjacent. So to find these, I would go sine -1 of 24 over 25, or cosine -1 of 7 over 25, or tangent -1 of 24 over 7. So first I'll do sine. So inverse sine, 24 divided by 25. According to that, the angle is 73.7, which we can round to 74. Using cosine, I would do second cosine, but this time I'm doing 7 divided by 25. I get 73.7, which is basically 74. And using tangent, I'd go tangent of 24 divided by 7. I get 73.7, which is 74. So it doesn't matter which one I use. Like in this situation, when I have all the information for the sides, I can use anything, sine, cosine, or tangent, and I'll get the same answer if I do it right. Sometimes you're going to leave off a piece of information, so I'm forced to use one or the other. Like if I didn't have the 25, then I would have to use tangent because I only have opposite and adjacent. So sometimes you're going to have to use a specific one. But I wanted to show that basically all of them get me the same angle in the triangle.